class of '06. I work at Wells College in the alumni engagement within advancement, so in Pettibone. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And we are really proud and happy to have Saira Raza, class of '02 here tonight. Saira is actually the person who started the activism symposium. Was it '02 or '01?
It was that 02. Academic year. So I planned it, the fall of '01, and then it happened spring '02.
And then some of the students on here may not know because we couldn't have it last year with COVID. So this year we're going all in to do virtual, but usually it's April and classes are canceled and we all can learn something from one another. And that was kind of the whole premise. And it was really fun. When I was a student from '02 to '06, I started after Saira graduated. I remember going to them every year and how cool it was to learn from different folks. That's a little bit of background. And this will be recorded, so share with your friends. And I'm going to just read the Cayuga land acknowledgement. For those of you who are unaware, this was approved by the faculty in May of 2018, and it's read at events. Wells College recognizes our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. This land is the traditional land of the Cayuga Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Wells College commits itself to ensuring the traditions and culture of Indigenous peoples are embraced and reflected upon in order to engage in solidarity with the Cayuga Nation. And yeah, if you have any questions throughout, pop it in the chat or raise your hand. If you don't know how to do that, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little button with an emoji. It says reactions. If you click that, there's a raise hand button. And we should have plenty of time for questions. And then we have other events all month, including tomorrow night at 7 with Stephanie Bachelor, class of '79. She's on tonight. So check that out. If you forget to register for something, this doesn't go for students. You don't have to register. You can just show up. Alums or other community members, just shoot us an email at alumoffice@Wells or communications@Wells and we'll get you a link. So don't stress if you forget to register, we'll get you in. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Emily, for organizing and all the, I saw the list. There's some students, there's some staff, there's some faculty. I love to see that it's such a community effort now to really contribute to this. And I'm definitely going to be talking a little bit about what it was like starting the first one and some of the challenges that I faced. Really just kind of the toll that it took on my body at that time. It was a pretty severe, I mean, I don't even think anybody realizes what was going on behind the scenes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, I had brought a land acknowledgement as well, but I'm so happy to know that Wells not only is doing it, but has been doing it before it was cool, I guess. So I'm very encouraged to know that that has always been kind of, that there's been faculty and students who have a really high awareness of the impact of our spaces and what we do on the community around us. Oh, that's awesome at sporting events too. That's amazing. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And I also know, Wells has always been very engaged with the Haudenosaunee people. So I really hope that that's a relationship that's continuing to be built as well. I am in Atlanta, which is the ancestral home of the Muskogee Creek and Cherokee people. And one thing I'd like to include in my acknowledgements that we do here, I think contextually, especially in Georgia, is also do a labor acknowledgement, because many of the buildings and the spaces around us and just the land around us was, built by enslaved people whose labor and blood and really built the wealth that we know today. And they continue to be oppressed and denied many of the rights that are inherently given to them by just being human and being here. So I usually add that to my acknowledgements as well. Again, especially living in the South, living in Georgia, that's something we like to do here. Of course, it people do it the way they do it, but that's something we started doing at Emory where I work now. And so today I'm going to talk about this idea of no love without justice, which is premised on this wonderful book, All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I only read recently in the last couple of years. And it was really a life-changing text, something I wish I had read when I was a student or a younger person. Actually, this book was published, I think, in my first year of college. So I didn't know about it, but I really wish I had got my hands on it sooner. So I highly recommend it if you haven't already read it. And I want to focus on this one idea, this one chapter she has called No Love Without Justice. So just to share with you briefly the actual, oh wait, let me actually get myself together here. I have so many tabs open now. All right, I'm not going to be in presentation mode on my thing because it's too weird to do it in sharing, but here we go. So yeah, let me see, maybe I can do it. There can be no love without justice. Abuse and neglect negate love. Care and affirmation, the opposite of abuse and humiliation, are the foundation of love. It is a testimony to the failure of loving practice that abuse is happening in the first place. And the reason I wanted to, how this might relate to activism is I think that's one of the roots of all of the work that we do, right? Is to try to extend these feelings of love and acceptance and affirmation to communities and people who have been deprived of that by social structures, by economic forces, things like that. So I thought this was an important concept to bring to the table, that you can't, justice has to be there first before we all can really experience love in its fullness. And so, we'll talk a little bit about that. Then I want to pivot into some of the history of the activism symposium and some of the things that my story of burning the candle at both ends and really suffering deep, like very, very deep consequences, for me, as far as the other side of that. You get these great outcomes, but there's a toll that it takes. And I would say that it's only recently that I've finally learning how to balance that. Again, something I wish that I knew much earlier in life. And then we'll talk about broadly just that idea of balancing the rest and self-care with your activism and your work, and how, again, as I am learning now, that is an essential part of it, that you won't be able to sustainably continue your work if you don't integrate a loving practice of self-care and self-affirmation. It will be much more difficult as you grow to extend these feelings and these concepts to others in your work. So, and well, I wanted to start first. I mean, I'm hoping this will be pretty conversational, but I was curious to know from all of you, when you think of rest, what does rest mean to you? What does that word mean to you? When you, what are some ways that maybe you rest, but what does that word mean to you? Sleep. Yeah. I love sleep too. I took a nap today and that was lovely.
I'm pretty basic. I love like a bubble bath or being in my garden. Really having a dog has been like one of the best things to get me through this year. I just, especially in winters, but yeah, like getting outside every day in some way is a big one for me.
I see Abby said spending time with loved ones. Absolutely. We all recharge our energy in different ways. Some of us like to do it alone. Some of us need other people to do it, right? That's that extrovert, introvert. Where do you recharge? How do you recharge? So rest, not being tethered to a, right, freedom, yes. to spend my time as I please, kind of leisure, right? The idea that you can have this brief moment where nothing else matters but just to be in the present and experience and then enjoy the moment where you are, whether it's the smells or the feel or the sounds or the people or the conversation, but to be fully present. Yes, accidentally forgetting your phone. I didn't even include that in this talk, but I know that there's a whole other avenue of this about the way that technology has, like you said, tethered us, or that Melanie said tether. I like that word tether. You
Yeah.
just constantly, even if you're over here, you just feel it just a little bit, kind of pulling your attention back to those things, not having to be on, right? Just being able to kind of let loose and really just decompress. These are great. But in the context of the society we work in, I know as I began to join the workforce and even in college, honestly, I think part of our culture in America is one that really puts at a premium this idea of, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Just work, gotta grind, the hustle, and that these are cultural norms. These are cultural norms that we've accepted, that are put in place, that we're walking into as people, as new professionals, as students, that it's okay and expected that you're going to make outrageous personal sacrifices for your work or your career or your education. I mean, outrageous sacrifices, being far from your family, not being able to, maybe not even getting health care, things like that, really outrageous expectations for you to show up and do your job and show commitment. These are norms that are rooted in a deeply capitalist imperialist ideology of work. That when you work, that the fruits of your labor only come to you in the form of a paycheck, but the real value gets transferred to the organization or to the owners, or in the Marxist sense, the owners of the means of production, right? So full disclosure, I am a Marxist. I'm pretty much like a neo-Marxist, and I learned it at Wells, so it's your fault.
Be careful, because we're being recorded and I might get some emails about that.
No, we just have very progressive professors. Not everybody comes out like that, as a disclaimer, but I learned a lot. I'll say critical pedagogy, critical perspectives of the existing systems, right? I think that there's some helpful tools, some helpful lenses, whether or not you embrace the full idea of it, there are some really helpful critical tools that you can use to kind of question some of the norms that we've accepted. And in the context of work and rest, we know that this idea of work and how people relate to work is deeply entrenched with like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. These are all embedded in it. For example, the stereotypes that certain groups of people are inherently lazy or don't like to work or are unprofessional looking or not a good fit or not trying hard enough, right? I have ADHD, and that's something I get a lot, if I slip up on something that everybody else finds really, really easy to do, but it's actually really hard for me, the immediate thing is like, you're not trying hard enough. How could you do, when I know what I'm capable of, and I know that this is something that just doesn't come naturally to me. And so these are the types of things that if you're living in the world with something that's considered outside of the norm, which by norm, I mean, white male heterosexual, cis male heterosexual identity, then there must be something wrong with you if you can't live up to this expectation of work. And I'll say, even for those people who menstruate, that's like a perfect example, right? Every month you're going through this really exhausting, sometimes painful, debilitating experience, but there is an expectation that, one, you won't talk about it, you don't bring it up, you don't tell people this natural process that that a lot of people, almost half the population, does. And you can't talk about it and how it makes you feel and how it helps, how it affects your ability to be present for whatever you're meant to be doing in your job. There's a wonderful art author named Saira Raza. She does a lot of work in this area. She actually published an article recently, which I feel like as a librarian, I should like maybe put together an annotated bibliography for this of all the things, all the sources I'm mentioning. But she's coming out with a book soon called Work Will Not Love You Back. And I think this is just an idea that I'm trying to embrace for myself, to set boundaries, right? And this does relate to activism because the same thing can happen there. For those, for me, I find now my activism takes place at work because there's a lot of issues within the workplace that I want to see change. So it goes hand in hand, and that might be true for some of you, or maybe true for some of you in the future. Right now you're at school, or some of you are at school, and maybe your activism is entrenched in that community that you're in. So it all kind of becomes part of the same thing. And it can become very difficult to set those boundaries. So, excuse me, I just really loved how Bell Hook's words remind us that if we're going to achieve justice, we need to have a loving practice, an emphasis on the word practice, because I think that's another thing that has more recently, maybe the last 3 or 4 years, I've really meditated on that word practice, because we get very attached to the outcomes, you know, the degree, the promotion, the you know, the award, whatever it is. And even with activism, you know, you have to embrace this idea of non-closure, that you're never going to fix everything. Like, you as a person cannot possibly take that on. That's unfair to yourself. It's unfair to the movement. It's unfair to what needs to be done, because there's no way any person can really take that on in that way. So developing a practice of loving yourself and others on a daily basis. And, you know, if anybody who's ever learned an instrument, the first time you pick it up, it sounds pretty awful. I mean, let's be real, right? If you were deciding to pick, and you were basing it on how you sounded the very first time you played it, that's ridiculous to make that kind of decision. Well, I'm never going to play it again. It sounded terrible. That's not how that works. You know, you spend easily 15 minutes a day. Within a few weeks, you're like, oh, I can play a little bit more. Give yourself a year, you're playing full songs. And it's the same way with love. It's the same way with your activist practice. You know, it's a practice. You're going to spend a little bit of time on it as you go, and you're going to get better and better and better. Or as I like to say, I won't get worse. So, so practice involves a process. It involves incremental growth. It involves making mistakes. It involves things being a total flop, you know, totally didn't work. It involves experimentation. And this is a case in point. This activism symposium, the original one, was a full experiment. It hadn't been done. I mean, I had to convince a lot of people that it would work, and that was really, really hard. I'll tell you that much. It was a really uphill battle. And there were things that went wrong. There were a lot of things that went wrong that day. I mean, like, our keynote speaker didn't make it to Wells. Like, she was sitting at the hotel in Syracuse waiting for somebody to pick her up, and there was a snafu about the scheduling of the van. So the van never got up there. But by the time we realized it, it was too late. There was no way we could get a van up there to get her and get back in time to actually have the talk. So it just didn't happen. She didn't make it. We paid her $2,000, and she stayed at the hotel, at the airport hotel in Syracuse, and never made it. And myself and President Ryerson at the time, Lisa Ryerson was the president, she was freaking out. We both were freaking out. I said, you know what, let's just get up there and we'll just do it ourselves. And it was me and her up there, and we did it ourselves, just on the fly, just made it up. And it was fine, you know. That's a huge thing to go wrong, but it still went fine. So all that to say, that's what this is. Practice takes a lot of experimentation. It's going to take frustration, maintenance, boundaries. and the occasional performance, right? The first activism symposium was the performance. It's performance time, and you just got to make it work. And the adrenaline is rushing. But I find as a musician, what I've learned is that performance can amplify the impact of practice, right? So you practice. When you perform, that stuff gets locked in, it just locks in. And it's like an exponential level of practice, right? When you're just, the adrenaline's locking it in. So that's where you want to get with your loving practice, right? practice. And then there's some kind of crisis and you have to really dig deep to show love and overcome fear, right? Overcome worrying about what other people are going to think, or all of this. It takes work. Abuse and neglect negate love. So neglecting your own basic needs does not send the right message about justice. One of my friends has told me frequently, they use this phrase, don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Right? You are the only you that we have, and we need you to be here to continue the work and to be present. And it doesn't mean that there won't be sacrifice or risk. Those things certainly happen. But the justice and love that you show yourself reflects and amplifies in your work when you're spreading justice for others. Okay. So my question for you, another question is, what happens when you don't get rest? What kind of person are you? Have you ever, what kind of person? I know when I haven't been rested, I am short, like my temper gets really short. Like I just don't have the threshold to deal with conflict. I get spacey. I already forget a lot of things, but let me not get sleep. And believe me, it will be a wreck. What are your kind of, when do you kind of notice that I think I need a rest? Like, what are some of those cues for you in your life when you're kind of at that point?
I get angry.
You get angry, yeah.
Like almost an explosive rage kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just get a trigger and I realize, okay, I need to turn off, need to close the doors, turn off the lights, and turn off.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing to happen, right? If you're trying to do justice work, yeah, and you show up and you just blow up at everybody, it's happened to the best of us, perfectly good intentions. But if you're not taking care of yourself, you will actually sabotage your own work. You'll sabotage the work of what you've been working on so hard, and the work of others, people who trust you. You can really lose people's trust that way. And that's, again, something I certainly have experienced. I've experienced that where people, you ruin relationships that way. And so
I feel like I can relate to, there's some comments too, and I feel like I can relate to everything. Like, everything is annoying. I'm really anxious and sometimes depressed. I find that everything feels like the end of the world when I'm burnt out. I'll make mountains out of every molehill. I know for me, I feel really like irritable, or I'll cry at the drop of a hat. And but yeah, the mountains out of a molehill feels so real. It's just like everything's the end of the world.
Yeah, Darwin, I see your comment here about anxiety and depression. If you already have those things too, which I have as well, and it's like it can just go even higher, right? You can really, and that's actually part of what I'll share is I really actually had a major depressive moment in the planning of the fall before the symposium. I had a full meltdown. So we'll talk about that in a second too. Yes. Yeah, everything becomes very amplified, very out of proportion, very distorted. I mean, it is, I don't, obviously I'm not a scientist, don't know the science behind it, but if you kind of think about mind altering drugs and it's anything that it's a chemical thing, right? I mean, I think stress and not getting rest can have similar effects of just distorting reality, distorting reality. And in order to do justice work, you have to be deeply rooted in reality. Because if you're living in fantasy land or in angry land, I mean, you're not going to get anything done, So thank you all so much for sharing that. I can definitely relate to every single one of those experiences. So the symposium started again, 2001, 2002. A little context about what was going on for me that year. That was my senior year. Planning the first symposium, I was writing my thesis. I was in the midst of a pretty deep spiritual crisis, which was really difficult. I was president of Collegiate. We were having student-led protests about the lack of support for BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous, people of color on campus. I was taking overloaded credit hours, because I'm me, and I decided that that was like the right thing to do. If I could do it all over again, I would have been a studio art major and just not stress myself out. At that time, I was undiagnosed, but obviously I still had ADHD because that's something you have your whole life. So I was undiagnosed. So I was not knowing how to manage it and still dealing with it. And that year, 2001 was also when 9/11 happened. And there was a lot of violence against Muslims happening at that time. So I was very, very stressed and very, shook about all of that. The more credits, the more fun, right? Okay. I think maybe fun at age 20 involved all this I'm about to tell you about. Maybe it's a bit of a roller coaster. When you're younger, I had a little bit more resilience. As you get older, though, that resilience becomes a little more brittle.
This is a little bit of an aside, but you mentioned 9/11, and we have students now who weren't alive when that happened or were toddlers, but the campus still does a 9/11 ceremony every year, and that was right before I came to Wells. But there were people on campus who were impacted because their families or young alums who had graduated and moved back to the city and stuff. But so they do a ceremony every year, and they have like a memory garden space on campus where you can go have a quiet space, but they have people whose lives are impacted. So even like students who lost family members and stuff can speak about it and how it impacted their lives. And I thought that was really special coming back as staff to see that and know that, because I just assumed, oh, they weren't alive,
Yeah.
But then faculty and staff too, sharing stories about their experiences. And I thought that's really special. And it's kind of not something that's like widely known in the Wells community outside of on campus.
Yeah, I had no idea that y'all were doing that. That's really great. I love that. So in the midst of all of this, I wasn't sleeping at all. I mean, I hardly ever slept. I pretty much spent the night in Macmillan Computer Lab, and when I wasn't doing that, I was at Morgan in the Book Art Center just making books all night. It was just something, I couldn't sleep, so that's what I would do. I would just keep my hands busy. What ended up happening was I had a complete meltdown. I was like, I can't even describe. It's like your whole body just full of like it's gonna burst, but I didn't know what it was. What I know now is it's called emotional dysregulation, that I had a lot of emotions and no idea what they are and how to deal with them. And I remember I made myself a bowl of ramen, and I sat on the floor of my dorm room and I was trying to eat it, and I couldn't even put the soup in my mouth. I just dropped the spoon and just started bawling. I couldn't stop crying. I mean, that was it. I was done. I had nothing else. And so I called a friend, and she came and picked me up. And my parents lived close by. I was from Lansing originally, so I didn't live too far from home. And she came, put me in her car and brought me home. I spent the night at home, and I woke up, I felt a lot better, but I came back to campus and I went and talked to the dean and told her what happened. And they basically said, you have to take a leave of absence. They actually forced me to take a leave of absence because they were like, this is not good. So I took a leave of absence for about a week or two. I can't remember now. But that was difficult, right? When you're so invested in everything you're doing. I think part of it is almost like, I mean, it's a little bit of like ego death a little bit, because it's, I had to kind of learn that the world wasn't going to fall apart if I just took a minute, right? I think like putting that pressure on myself that I had to hold all this together was complete, it wasn't real, you know, that's not reality, right? You know, like what I was really doing is setting myself up for that exact kind of outcome of just not being able to go any further. And I'm really grateful that, you know, people that somebody at Wells had the wherewithal to tell me what, you know, you need to not just stop. Just, it doesn't matter. We'll talk to your professors. We'll take care of it. Just like go rest. And that was amazing. You know, I never even thought that that was possible. So that was empowering. You know, because again, I was getting minimal sleep. Another sign was that it was minimal hygiene, right? I was just staying up all night and losing track of the days and just not like taking care of my body, drinking lots of caffeine, just caffeine. I gained a lot of weight. And, you know, again, it was just my buying into this idea that I had to work that hard. And I'll say this as well, I don't really know who else here identifies, but as a person of color, I think that's an added weight, you know, because there, and I was also a first generation college student. So there's this added weight of feeling like I have to live up to a certain idea. I have to show up. I have to really prove myself, because I just didn't have it inside of myself to say that it was there, right? I really had to prove myself. So the outcomes of that, you know, outcomes and consequences of the whole picture is, you know, taking a rest did help, and everything turned out fine. You know what I mean? It didn't, nothing ended because I took a rest. I didn't not finish my thesis. The symposium still happened, finished my classes, everything was fine. It all got done. That was like, I wasn't able to see that before I had this massive crisis. The symposium exceeded everybody's expectations. I don't think anybody, you know, I think maybe in retrospect, I wish I had had the skills to better express what I was seeing, my vision. I think that maybe I was really young. I mean, I was like, you know, 20 years old, still learning things, you know, and that's also like, that was a massive organizational change project. And I had no idea that that's what it was at the time, but as an, you know, further along in my experience, I'm like, whoa, that was a huge undertaking. And I just really took that for granted. So it exceeded everyone's expectations, even with the mistakes, it still exceeded expectations. I'm super proud of that. And this, I mean, not that I didn't think it would, didn't have faith or hope that it would, but I'm like, I can't believe it's still happening. Like, to me, that just makes me feel so good. But here's the other thing. I got a D+ on my thesis, y'all. You know, that's what happens. You know, I was upset.
Get that degree.
Huh?
Just got to get that degree.
That's it. But you know, like as somebody who's a really, you know, high achiever, and that bothered me a lot. You know, I really was kind of hurt by it because I worked really hard on it, and I thought it was good, but I just wasn't. I mean, again, undiagnosed ADHD. I wasn't keeping up with the deadlines. Everything was super at the last minute, and in retrospect, I'm like, oh, my advisor must have hated me. Like, there's no way. Like, he must have really hated me, but I was just oblivious to it, you know, not really able to grasp that. So that's a consequence, right? You know, I stretched myself too thin and something had to give. You know, got the mental health crisis. You know, that wasn't a great thing. I wish I had learned some balance earlier. And I got into grad school, so it was fine. I didn't know what I was going to do after college. That's the other thing. I like had no clue what I was going to do. I was just like super lost. So thankfully, I got into grad school, gave me a couple years buffer to kind of like figure that part out. So what I learned from that was that asking for help. I mean, just I should have asked for more help along the way. And the times that I did ask for help, there was always somebody to show up. Somebody always showed up. And that's what I think in retrospect, I want to hold on to. That when I finally had the good sense to ask, somebody would have the good sense to help. And that was, I think I took that for granted. And I remember, like it would just be one person. It wouldn't be like, oh, 10 people showed up and they want to be part. No, it might just be one person and it might still be grueling. I had one person drive me up to like Sam's Club to get like sodas and stuff for the thing. And then I had another friend drive me somewhere else to get more like folders and whatever labels and stuff. And, and then my poor friend, Raisa, she stayed up with me all night the night before, just stuffing folders with stuff, like the kind of nitty gritty things that have to happen to pull things like this off, or to do any of the things that you're doing as organizers or whatever. There's the day, the performance, but then there's all that little stuff you got to do up leading to it, the emails, the communication, the flyers, the posters, there's all types of stuff. All of that has to get done. Ask for help. Just get help. Somebody will do it. Maybe they won't do it exactly the way that you want, that you were gonna do it. And that's the thing you have to just kind of let go of. Because the more people that kind of contribute to it, the richer it becomes. I kind of feel like as a musician, again, as an artist, when you create something and you birth it, that thing is its own thing. It has its own life. And I feel that way about the symposium. I birthed it, and now it has its own life, and now it can vote. It's like 19 years old now. So, it's doing real well. It's thriving. I'm very proud of my baby. And then taking risks and failing can be an exponential learning experience. So part of the activism symposium that year that I had, actually the original one was a symposium on activism and service. There was a community service aspect to it. I had planned a whole like lakeside cleanup. We were going to spend the whole afternoon cleaning up the side of the lake, all the trash and stuff. I was the only one that showed up. So for about 2 hours, I just walked along the lake and picked trash all by myself. But, so that part wasn't quite as successful, and that's just part of it. You know what I mean? You can only do so much, so but that was a learning experience for me. And I've had many, many more failures. Don't worry. Lots of them. But you gotta, what they say, take a licking and keep on ticking. You know what I mean? Like just keep going. And things that I didn't realize until later that I wish I had realized sooner is that time awareness, of how much time things are taking and balancing that self-care with it. Kind of like, what, do we really need to have folders and handouts? Probably not. I could probably have just slept instead, right? That didn't really, it was fun. I think it was nice to have, but I think it would have been just fine without it. Then again, back then we didn't have like cell phones and apps and all types of other ways of doing things. So like paper printouts was kind of the only way that you could. So I don't know.
Sometimes that stuff just makes it crazier.
Yeah.
We had like actual phones in our rooms, and then also AOL Instant Messenger. So you could leave a message and marker boards on your door, but you could say like your whole schedule in your instant message, like away message. That would be like, I have 7 until 4, and then I'm doing my planning for the activism symposium in the WRC until 6 or whatever. And like my whole day would be there. So you could find your friends on campus and not have to go all the way over to Dodge.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I was there 98 to 2002. Like I just got a cell phone like junior year, and you could only use it like for like a minute before 9 o'clock. So anyway, it was different then. I shouldn't be so hard on myself about it. But again, approaching life, and again, something I wish I had learned sooner is this idea of approaching life, approaching projects as practice instead of focusing rigidly on specific outcomes. Like if it doesn't turn out this way, then it didn't work. And that's not true. That's not true at all. Yeah, there's so many things that the process can bring to you and practice can bring to you. Oh, and I also, you know what? I also, just for fun, I actually dug up some photos of the protest that we did when I was there. Let me get back to my presentation here. So here is, these are actually proofs I found. I don't have the actual photos. I just have proofs because I was taking a photography class. So I'm sorry, it's a little dull. But you can see, this is when we were protesting to get some kind of professional, we called it multiculturalism and diversity at the time, which now we usually say diversity, equity, inclusion, that kind of role. We were asking for this at the time because students of color were just really struggling to feel supported and to have certain needs met, that we were just doing a lot of work on our own, spending a lot of time organizing with each other, making space for ourselves. And I think that's one of those aspects of activism. If you are part of a community that for which you're trying to achieve some social justice goals, there's that balance of the labor of doing it, the labor of teaching others how to respect you. That's extra labor. You're going to school for them to teach you and you're teaching them a bunch of stuff. That doesn't feel great all the time. And we found that that was happening more often than we would like. And we just felt like there needed to be somebody in the administration to just kind of manage that, to educate the professors, educate the staff, support the students in this way. So we did a huge protest to kind of bring awareness to this need. And as far as I know, within a year or two, they actually did hire somebody for this role. I think my recollection is that there was a brief period where they didn't have somebody in the role, but now they do again. So I don't know the full history of it, but what I do know is that we were successful in a certain way, that we really made a statement and we really did move the needle. So you can see here, we have all of our demands, posters. So again, we had a poster writing party. We all organized together. Here's some more. And I think what I love about these pictures is it just reminds me of all the different groups that we worked with. Like I was the collegiate president, but then we had at that time it was called Power, praising our work, ethnicity, and race. Now I know they have many different groups. And we had the Women's Resource Center and we had the LGBTQ group. We all worked together and we came together and organized together. So that's a really effective strategy for not burning yourself out. Work with other groups whose interests are shared with yours, because you will find that there are so many more resources available. I'm not a religious person, but there's a story my mom tells. She has a interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount and the fishes and the loaves. When they say there was a miracle that Jesus created fishes and loaves, for everybody to eat when they were hungry. What I love about her interpretation of it is that, like Jesus said, if you'll be blessed. I don't know the exact words because I am so far away from religion at this point, but but what she said, the way my mom teaches it is that this young boy comes up and said, "Here, you can have my lunch." And the blessing was not that the items themselves multiplied, but that others were encouraged and inspired to give. So once others also gave what they had, there was more than enough. There was some to take away. And I think that this is a great example of that when you just put it out there and you see one person come forward, when everybody comes together, there's more than enough for everybody. And I think that can be true in your social, stone soup situation. Exactly. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm just looking at some of the chat now. I'm sorry, I'm missing some of it as I talk, but there's me right here. I don't know if you can see me right here in the corner, standing up on a dining hall table. And then
the two comments that we missed in the chat where Emily said, I think a lot of us don't know how to take our foot off the gas. We push so hard, we forget we have a brake pedal. And then Emily said more of a stone soup situation, which I love.
Exactly. And I think that's what you'll find in your activist work is that, it's really important to just kind of share the weight with others and find others who, even if they're have a different focus, that there is a lot that you have in common than different. Let me get back to my notes here. Okay. So, so one thing that I'm experiencing right now in my work at, I'm a academic librarian. In academic libraries, there's an enormous amount of disparity. with who gets, well, one, it's 80, for like almost decades now, it's been about 83% white, the profession of librarianship, which is very disparate from like the communities that we serve. It doesn't really reflect that. We find that it's a much more difficult field to get into if you're a Black, Indigenous person of color, just because of the networks and all types of systemic issues. And what we find also is that sometimes when organizations are doing things that may not exactly work for the people or the workers, that it can be really difficult to organize because you're so tired from the work itself, right? And I think that can be a tool of people in power to create confusion, right? To create confusion and create exhaustion. So I think it's important to be aware of those times that that element is being used against your movement to create so much confusion that you're just in the weeds trying to dig yourself out and you can't actually make the focused change. And so this is where it becomes even more important, again, to take care of yourself, take care of your body, and stay balanced. Because in the midst of that, you're going to have to, again, not get angry, not bite people's head off. You're going to have to stay very focused on what the issue at hand. That can be a really, I'm thinking about, for example, right now, there's the labor movement for Amazon workers. Okay, that's really huge. It affects all of us. I'm sure everyone here probably uses Amazon at least from time to time, but probably more than a few times a week during pandemic, right? But we know that there are some deeply systemic issues with the way that they treat their workers and the rights that they have. Rest was a core tenet of the labor movement in the early 20th century. I mean, that's what the Haymarket Affair was about, right? They were trying to get an 8-hour workday so that they could have time to take care of themselves. And people died. People died. They did not want to give them time to take care of themselves. That's how deeply entrenched this idea of deprivation of rest, that some people deserve it and some people don't deserve it. You know, do you deserve rest? This idea that workers don't deserve it. That's insane, right? That people have to work so many hours, 2-3 jobs just to stay afloat. That's not right. You know, like some of the people that work some, you know, minimum wage jobs, they should be able to go home after a normal 40-hour week, which even that some people argue is still too much, because I know I work 40 hours and I still don't have time to do everything I need to do to take care of myself and the people I care about. So that's still a problem. You know, we don't get vacation time in this country. There's a lot of policies that we have that prevent us from taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other in a wholesome, healthy way, so we can really show up and be present and be engaged and be involved. But being engaged and being involved isn't really what some people want, right? The more we stay distant, the more we stay distracted, the more we stay confused and too tired, some people benefit from that. And so that's where I think the issue of rest becomes a social justice issue in and of itself. That if you're not getting rest, if you find your life is in chaos all the time, you know, and you just don't even have a minute, that's not good. You know, that's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. And I think this is another thing, you know, this idea that rest is tied to the value of labor, that your time is worth a certain amount while somebody else's time is worth a different amount. You know, this idea that time is money, right? Your time is money, that time is money. That rest is an experience that's exclusive to the leisure class, that you have to earn it. You have to like work your way up until you can finally get a boat, get a yacht and sit on it, right? That's ridiculous. You know, not every, you know, that's not a reasonable expectation for everybody. So I think just being aware of the ways that deprivation of rest might be used to be an obstacle to your organizing, be very mindful of this. And even in the college experience, I think going back to how I felt, what was expected of me, that wasn't expected of me. But, you know, I think the social pressure made me feel like that's what needed to happen. And so, rest, consider rest as an element to incorporate into your work, both as a demand, as something that you ensure is there on the table, as something that you provide for each other in a way, as you're working together, organizing, create. I think it's really important for anything to have celebratory moments. You do something really hard and just take a moment to just like sit together and enjoy each other's company. Celebrating your accomplishments, even if they're really small, is really important. Otherwise, what else do you have? You know what I mean? Again, it's that non-closure. You're not going to solve all the things, but every little thing that you kind of do, celebrate with the people that you work with, celebrate with your allies, because that's the little moments that you'll have along the way. You may not get to see, like the other side of it, as like Martin Luther King said. I think he said, he wouldn't see the promised land, right? I mean, or, he took that from Moses, like he wouldn't see the promised land. And it's true, I mean, we probably still haven't seen it, honestly. But it's like, the work that you do might exceed your awareness or your experience. So just give yourself the time in the moment to celebrate the small successes and to commune with those with whom you have something in common. A couple of examples that I like of integrating rest into your work. There's a wonderful consulting firm called Beloved Community, and they do consulting with organizations about how to integrate social justice and how to integrate DEI principles into the workplace. And one thing that they do as part of their company is they have a paid sabbatical for the month of February. Everybody in the company gets to take a sabbatical. I mean, that's wonderful. That's amazing. I mean, what would I give for just like a minute to think for myself and apply what I know to things, projects that I find important? And that when you think about rest, whether it's in your workplace or as part of your activism, it goes beyond just, work-life balance. Goes beyond just enough time to handle your personal business. Really think about deep rest. That rest is practice and rest is doing something. It's not the absence of doing something. I think that's another misconception, right? That rest is like, I'm not doing anything. Rest is doing something. You are resting. It's a verb. And if rest is resistance in that way, it inherently involves strength and effort and persistence and imagination, right? It requires boundaries. That takes a lot of work. And resistance, by its very definition, implies that there's an oppositional force, right? You're resisting means there's something pushing you at you. So in that sense, the push, the draw to be engaged or productive, this idea of productivity is super toxic. Engage, that you just don't deserve to exist as you are, just as you are, that you need to, that your value is based on what you produce. That's a myth. And it basically essentially flattens the existence of the working class. It makes you feel two-dimensional, right? And in service to capitalism's illusion of self-expanding value. You're just one element, you're two-dimensional. So I think it's really important to remember that rest is that part that makes you a full person, and really pushing that boundary and understanding that it is resistance to offer yourself that opportunity and to do it for others, to make sure that others are getting that rest. And that's that part of being an ally to people, even if you're not in that community. That's the important part of being an ally. Is there a way you can help them get a little rest? Maybe that's one way to approach your allyship. What can I do to just take the burden off and give this person a rest? It makes me think of the Arab Spring in Egypt, when the Muslims who were protesting needed to pray, and the Christians created a circle around them so that they could pray in peace and have that moment. I think that's a great example of how, as an ally, you can protect a restful space for other people who need it, who need that space. So that's, I think there's a lot of ways that to do that. And rest should recharge you, not drain you, right? So if, maybe part of your resting time, you go out and party, but if you're really tired the next day, it doesn't serve you that well, it should recharge you. So think about that. So I guess, I know we only have a few minutes. I have some, I kind of have a list of folks that I would love for you to visit. There's a wonderful person named, now I can't remember her name. She goes by the nap minister. She's called the nap ministry, and her whole ministry is about naps and about naps as a form of resistance. So I very much recommend that you look her up, the nap ministry. Of course, Bell Hooks, who I produce. Audrey Laura does a lot of great writing on this idea of self-love and kind of exercising your space and boundaries. I mentioned earlier, Sarah Jaffe, Work Will Not Love You Back. That's another reference that I think would be great for you to look into. And that's pretty much all I had. I guess I'm curious now. I know we're kind of at 8, but if we have a few more minutes for conversation, I would be curious to know, what steps after this might be coming to you as a way to start or enhance or expand your loving practice of rest. Like, are there some things you might consider trying?
So I just want to say thank you so much for this. It was a wonderful presentation. And I'm not saying I learned nothing, but I do have an 8 o'clock Zoom. So I have to leave, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.
Emily,
Oh, Abby, you follow them on Instagram. Yeah, they're so great. Yeah.
I know. I like to see like what my friends like to do for rest. Like I know Melanie because we played on Eveline together. We go way back. She does dance lessons with ballroom dance and fun competitions, and she kayaks and has a dog. Like I love to get ideas from other people.
Yeah.
So that's one way I try to like, I know social media can be such a pit, but like I really love to see when people are doing fun things with their kids or gardening. And my friends have a lot of people who love their plants and gardens. So it's really exciting to, really just nourish something and cooking and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's funny how nourishing something else can nourish yourself too, right? It's really, that's a great concept. I love that. Yeah, maybe in the next symposium you can add nap time.
My partner actually is a big napper. She works for herself. So she's built a life where she's able to do that. She used to do corporate management stuff where you can't nap. So she gets up really early, like 4 or 5, and puts in a big work day, but she takes a nap and she's healthier and she's a better person. And sometimes it's a clash with, especially now that I've been working from home this year, navigating how to support her in that, because I don't always get that life, but I definitely love it when I can. But yeah, it makes her a happier, healthier person. Yeah, super important. But yeah, I like Emily said, I love the idea of using allyship to take the burden off someone else. I like that too. And it's hard to know how to support folks sometimes. Like one of my friends who's a woman of color, this past year has just been so awful. It feels like a new civil rights movement, right? And there was a period of time where she kind of disappeared from our Wells friend group chat. And I knew she was just trying to just get through the days. And so I just kept sending her Starbucks gift cards because I'm like, I don't know how else to be supportive. And I would send her a message and say, I'm thinking of you if you want to talk. But she would just disappear. And so I'm just like, go get yourself a fun Frappuccino or something.
I mean, I think that's a great example. I mean, I think doing things like that just to acknowledge, the work that others are doing and how hard they're working, it can go a long way. Just that quick word of affirmation, because when you're doing that kind of work, I mean, you just get so much resistance. I mean, and it's thankless. It is thankless. I mean, like my little ways. I mean, I'm not, I guess maybe for a while I thought, am I even still doing activist work? Because it's so tied to my actual career, but it is, it very much is. If you're living in the world and you're part of a community that has been marginalized, like so much of just your everyday life is going to be a work
Yeah.
of activism. Just existing itself is a form of resistance.
Yeah.
And just
and Emily's heard me say this 100 times, but you know, when someone's like, well, I don't always know the right thing to say. And it's like, you don't have to know the exact right thing. Like, you're going to screw it up. I was talking about it with my mom too last week, who's a little more liberal than she was when I was a kid. So it's, you know, it's interesting to hear her tell me stories, but I'm like, you don't have to get it right every time. Like, just the point that you're trying to like do the right thing, even when no one's watching, is really awesome and brave.
Yeah, it's brave. And, you know, if you make a mistake, just set it right. You know, do what you can to set it right. Learn from it. You know, apologize, be honest, be sincere, do the best you can. I mean, I think that's all any of us can do, is just do the best we can. But yeah, I think sometimes, like what you said, just giving a kind word, sending a nice token, something to encourage people to take time for themselves. Because again, when you're in the middle of it, you feel like you can't be taken out like a Jenga piece, like, oh, it's all gonna fall apart. It's not. It's really not. You know, not to minimize one's importance, but it's like, if you just go sleep, I promise things are not going to fall apart. You know, like, you come back, it'll all be there for you in the morning, don't worry. It is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm working on it still, I'll say that much. I'm still working on it. This is kind of a new thing, but you know, just thinking about the deep, I mean, it was like a massive depression, you know, the whole meltdown that I had there was just
yeah. I feel that happened a lot to students. We actually don't have any students left on the call now, but I remember that was very common. And I remember having moments where I felt like that too, like, I'm never going to get through. And I see it now with them on social media and stuff, like, we don't get a spring break this year. And I think as adults, we're all like, all you have to do is school, but remember how stressful it was, and you just feel like it's going to be, don't get that grade, or what your next step.
Yeah, you know? It feels that way. It feels monumental. I love working in education for that reason. I get to like coach them a little bit, but I think this year has been hard. I mean, it's been hard for me. I don't get a break either. They're there, I'm there, you know, it's like, but but it's, yeah, everybody's taking a toll. And then you think about, you know, if you're in a organization where your needs aren't being met, you end up doing a lot of the work yourself, and that is just this extra burden, and it's exhausting. I'm very, very happy to see that Wells has done a lot more to support students in this way, because I'm telling you, I love Wells, don't get me wrong. I don't want to say anything to disparage it in that way, but it was hard. You know, it was hard.
Yeah, I think it's a know better, do better. And you still might hear feedback that's like, they're not doing enough, but you know, they're having a lot of resources. They actually just got a really big grant called the TRIO grant. I can't speak to it super well, but it's a big grant. I think it's $1 million over a few years. And it supports like first-gen students, low-income students, students of color, students with disabilities, and there are several positions that were hired for it. So it's some counseling stuff, it's school support stuff, and I'm sure there are other things that I'm not thinking of, but that's the gist that I can remember. And I got to help be on the hiring committee for one of the women we hired, and she just seems so awesome. Emily might be able to speak to it a little bit more, but I was like, that's awesome, because the first gen thing is huge, and just this just will meet some needs of our student population.
I love that. I'm happy to know things are improving. I mean, it was wonderful. I wouldn't change my Wells experience for anything.
Yeah, even just the student maturity level around like mental health needs and support is so different from when I was there. Like, when they talk about it, I'm really proud of them. Like, they're so smart about themselves.
Yeah.
Like, this generation is just so like, yeah, I go to therapy, or I have some anxiety, or, you know, and it's really cool because they're just figuring stuff out sooner than I did. That's for sure.
If only I had known.
I was just saying to Emily earlier, I'm like, all of these years, it was just anxiety.
Yeah, but I mean, they didn't really call it out like that. You know what I mean? Like, I guess that I'm thinking late 90s, early 2000s, it was still really taboo to like say we're going to therapy or to be taking medication.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of a joke. You know what I mean? Like, people would make fun of it just very casually. And it's no longer acceptable. I mean, people still do it, but it's like a lot less acceptable. So
yeah,
we've come a long way.
I have a feeling.
Ask what class are you from? Yeah.
Oh, you're muted.
Hi. I'm loving listening to this conversation, but I'm class of 79, right? Everything that we're talking about didn't even exist when I was there. When I was, growing up, we were facing our own coming out of the civil rights, trying to figure out what it all meant, especially in terms of feminism. But what you're talking about, I'm a public defender, a career defender, 35 years now, and this is one of our biggest topics because activism is kind of what we do, within the judicial setting. And we are all under-resourced, overburdened. And within our community, we do try to create this allyship and help each other. And what can I do? And yes, go take the time. But from the outside, nobody has any time. Move it along, council, get this done. How come you're not prepared for 6 trials? Because we don't know which one is going. And no, you can't have your investigator, and no, you can't have any help. And I'm sorry you can't hire a new secretary in your office, but you're all just going to have to figure out how to do the work. And we are in trying to develop a true public legal services system. We're trying to attract young lawyers into this. And they have to be prepared, right? This is the kind of conversation that we are trying to introduce as we are recruiting lawyers, to put all the cards on the table. Yes, we want you to take this on as a career. Activism, it's very important. It's very satisfying. It's very challenging. It's going to rip your heart out. It's going to make you tired. But we will do whatever we can to make it possible to keep you going. And so much of it is self-care, and not the manicure self-care necessarily. Not that a manicure is a bad thing, right? But the rest, I love what you were talking about, and the need for rest, and the resistance of, you've got to let me go rest. You've got to give us the time off. And it's a huge cultural problem.
Yeah, it is.
Capitalist cultural problem. That's the other thing I loved, your disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah.
I graduated with an economics degree from a very proud self-identified socialist economics department.
I figured, Stephanie, I'm glad you're on tonight because I figured you would really connect with your topics. So I'm excited to see the parallels when I'm on tomorrow's call too. Yeah.
I've been taking some notes. I'm hoping that, maybe I can weave some of this in to, some of the
yeah. I did some work with folks with disabilities for several years, and one agency was really good about self-care talk and like, especially if you had a really rough day or, really rough time. Like, I remember my supervisor would be great about being like, okay, Rachel, like, do you need the rest of the day off? Can I take over for your caseload today? Just really supportive. What are you going to do for self-care to make sure you're feeling okay, and that type of work, like social work, has such bad retention and, high turnover, and people are just stressed out. And then the other agency I worked for, a lot of great folks, but they didn't have that same push on that. Some of my immediate coworkers did, and the families that I worked with and stuff, but it just wasn't like the agencies. It wasn't as important. And it makes such a difference. Like, the pay's already low. It's stressful. I would get bitten and stuff sometimes, or just some really tough, CPS things. And I also had a lot of wonderful times, but yeah, that was the first job. Before that, I did some corporate management stuff. And so this was the first time I was it was really important to me to take my vacation time and take my lunch breaks and not work a million hours a week. You're just not, if you're paid for it, I guess that's one thing, but for me, the paycheck isn't worth it to me to not have a life or not see family for holidays, and that kind of thing. Emily knows, I'm always there are a couple people at work that I know will work through lunch or be like, it's fine, I'll just respond to these emails. And I'm like, you better clock in. No one's gonna die without your email.
I loved your term ego death, right? The world is not going to stop without any of us, any one of us, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important that we recognize that the work will fill in, people can pick it up, and then hopefully we can come back in rested and refreshed.
My job in my 20s where I just feel like I sold my soul to them, and then it was just I was just so replaceable, and yeah, and part of it's the capitalism, it's the work culture. Nobody wants to be seen as lazy. So I'm my generation too. You don't want to be seen as lazy. And it's like, yeah, but why? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's even an idea that's just like, what do you mean by that? You know, like, I think, yeah, I think it's, people use that term very loosely, like without really the full context that
I'm a big pusher. And then when I talk to students too, I'm like, listen, keep this in mind when you get your first full-time job, you know, like don't sell your soul to them. It's just not worth it. And you can be a great employee and not be available 100% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was invigorating. I'm so, thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me to be.
Thank you so much. And I know people will watch the recording. And again, we had the scheduling is really tough. You know, we got feedback that one day would have been better. And we're like, well, we can't do one day of virtual. That's just, nobody's going to sit in front of the screen all day. We all already did that.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah. We've done a couple of those, and yeah, oh my God.
It's just, and it's hard to just get it right. You know, Emily and I, every time we have one of these or a meeting, we're like, what could we have done better? And it's just such a weird year. So I'm just so grateful to have you all here and engaged and willing to talk to students and alums. And, you know, I'm sure there are other things we can be doing, but I would love to, even after this month, keep doing some things like this, because people do show up and are interested. And the students, again, even if they can't come, I get emails and messages that are like, thank you for doing it. So they really want you to be.
And I've had, on that same note, I've had several alums reach out who say something came up and I couldn't make it. Do you have the recording? And then I can send them the recording and they're like, this is so great. So that's been positive, that even if they're not catching it live in the moment, that you know, these are valuable conversations that we can use to show that we're, you know, supporting and that we are having these conversations.
Yeah.
So I know it's a short audience now, but Stephanie's on tomorrow. Saira tonight. I sent you guys a little package with our swag from the event, so you should